Welcome back to The Remote Life. My name is Han Talbot, also known as Han Meets World, and today I want to chat about a few not so sexy realities of what it means to live a remote lifestyle and tourism. If you're new here, I've been running the Remote Life podcast since 2021, and we've covered everything from finding a remote job to different ways people are living and working remotely, dating, property investment, and all the juicy conversations in between. We've also got so many different conversations coming up. So I just wanted to quickly pop in and talk about some stuff that I've noticed for myself in this space. A quick trigger warning, I guess, that this episode's going to be a bit more vulnerable and perhaps go into some deeper conversation than you might be comfortable with. So if you're not feeling up to that kind of an episode today, then I invite you to pause right now and come back when you are, or we'll see you in the next one. But if you feel like sticking around, then grab a coffee, a tea, or something stronger, and let's get started. It's funny, if you've ever tried to start a platform yourself, you'll probably know that it is one of the most interesting, that's air quote interesting, because, oh my goodness, it can be frustrating as heck at times. But it's also one of the most rewarding and incredible things you do for yourself. When I first started this podcast, you would never have caught me recording an episode by myself. I'd have been like, no, I don't have the authority to talk on these things. Who am I to be listened to? Or like, do you know what I mean? I had all these sort of self-doubt, self-sabotaging thoughts. Whereas now, what is it? Maybe 3, nearly 4 years in at this point to living and working remotely full time. And I'm like, I'm gonna come in. It's been a little bit of a while since I posted an episode. And I actually want to just sort of do a little bit of a reintroduction to the podcast itself after having a few months where honestly I got sick, life got too busy, travel happened, and it was all the things that actually made sense to talk about in this episode. So yeah, first of all, the podcast is still going to be about remote life. I've always been very specific. This is a remote lifestyle podcast because it is for people who may have a remote job and live in a city of their preference full time. It might be for the family that works, stays in a place for 3 months and then moves on, or 6 months and then moves on, and both, or a parent or both parents or whoever the family, they work a remote job. Or it might be somebody who is the traditional digital nomad that is living and working remotely while traveling full time. So yeah, the podcast is not really going to change, but in my head, I guess perhaps I'd like to start talking about more in depth about some of these topics, especially like as we see more and more people starting to enter the space. We're starting to see more podcasts popping up around this. And yeah, so I just wanted to share this. For me is also an episode to share about the sort of different view take and direction that I would also like to start taking the podcast. We're going to answer some more conversations in depth. We're going to dive into topics a bit more deeply and just to generally open up the conversation a lot more for people. On the surface, it might seem like things aren't necessarily changing, but for me as a person who's running this podcast, it feels like I kind of am taking it in a slightly new direction. But as always, if there's any topics that you would like to see, because this episode itself actually came up out of a few conversations that I've had with people and some DMs. Honestly, this podcast started from DMs. So if there's ever anything that you want to hear more about, please do share and let's continue this remote life journey together. But yeah, I guess for me, this podcast came up because I noticed a few things that come up in mainstream media, a few things that I see online, a few things that I get in my DMs, coupled with my own experience that I feel like perhaps could be talked about more. So the first thing that I feel that comes up, and if you've been following me on Instagram, you'll know that I just took a couple months to really just sort of be by myself, because one thing that we don't really talk about necessarily, and I guess maybe you do when you're traveling, but not so much in the remote life and digital nomad lifestyle, is that when you take this thing on seriously, there is an identity shift, honestly. And if you've ever started a business, if you've ever gone freelance, you'll probably know what I mean by that. If you've ever moved country before, you'll probably know what I mean by that. But there are a lot of different identity shifts that I feel like you had to learn to let go of and create anew. So, for example, I had to sort of let go of the trajectory that I was on pre-pandemic, for example, to where I'm at now with like what I've created for myself in the industry and just what it means to be in your 30s and living the lifestyle that we're living versus what we kind of brought up with living, and what it is that I want to see from the industry next. And not to say I'm trying to take on a whole industry here, but you know what I mean? Just what I want to see next in my business and how that could contribute to the industry in that respect. And what I didn't really realize up until December, and it was actually triggered by loss, a real loss, was that I hadn't taken the time to grieve that identity. And it might seem silly to sound like, oh, what do you mean grieve an identity? Like, what do you mean? And I really take the time to sort of be like, no, this chapter of my life is over. And some people aren't going to like that. You know, some friends have kind of exited my life because they weren't happy with who I was becoming. I thought I was going to be living this particular way when I was 30 something, according to what my societal norms had told me that I would be wanting. And even down to like just some stuff that happened because of the pandemic. Like, we don't talk enough about how the pandemic was also a massive thing for us. Like, it really did have a massive impact on our identities and who we thought we would be during those years. And whether it was how tired I was feeling, whether it was that I finally listened to myself and what my body needed and what I needed for myself, or because we had to deal with a few literal losses in the family, I finally took the time at the beginning of this year to really grieve who I thought I was and who I was still trying to bring into this lifestyle that just didn't fit, right? And I think that's the first thing. After you figure out why it is that you want to live this remote lifestyle, there needs to be this understanding that you're probably going to, at some point, grieve. Like, who am I going to be leaving behind within myself? Who am I leaving behind? As well as who could I be potentially leaving people behind? And again, that's not to say you're moving forward, they're not, and all the rest of it. But ultimately, I feel like I've had to deal with a few literal losses in the last couple of years that you may have noticed through my content, and you may not, or if you have, and we've had conversations, whatnot. But also the way that people are around you as you start building this lifestyle of your dreams doesn't get talked about enough. Like, some people I'm very grateful. Some people kind of fell away and I've not spoken to. Some people I've had to literally block. Some people have come back 2 years later and we've connected in an even stronger way than before, right? So first off, there is a certain identity that you take on. If this is something that you want to do long term, there is an identity shift that just can't be explained. It's just something you might have to work through when you live this remote lifestyle. And it's led me to then meet some incredible people as an amazing upside to this. You know, an amazing community. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to around people who get you, who get your lifestyle, who get what you do. And you can just talk about similar things as though you were around a group of friends, like in a regular 9-to-5 job, or, you know, your team over the water cooler or whatever it is. So there is that amazing upside. But I feel like we don't talk enough about the fact that you actually almost need to take some time to grieve who you thought you maybe once were and who other people maybe thought you once were. And I can imagine some people listening to this now going, Ham, what are you talking about? But that was my experience. As I said, it's funny, when I started this podcast, you never would have caught me talking about this. I'd been like, oh no, I can't talk about this deep stuff. But if you're ever finding yourself, honestly, even if you're building a business and you have a base, you might at some point come up against this, because at the end of the day, you've got to sort of let go of a certain way of being, a certain personality you thought you were, in order to create space for the person who you are becoming, ultimately. So yeah, that's the first thing, I guess. And it took me a bit longer than I should have done, but yeah, sometimes you just need to be literally slapped in the face by the universe and then forced to take a look at things. And I love self-development, by the way. I love journaling. I've got my amazing accountability partner, Nina, who's also been on the podcast. But sometimes you just aren't seeing some of the stuff that is deepest. And so, yeah, for me, that was at the end of this year where I was like, I've never been so sick in my life. I have never had so many troubles with food and just general direction, and then coupled with stuff that happened back home that meant that I was really forced to look at what was coming up for me and what I had not taken the time yet to work through. And I'm still working through it, but really work through. So that is the upside of the beauty of remote life, though, is that you can then pick destinations that resonate with what you're going through at the time. And so, yeah, for me, that was about going to Ericeira in Portugal at the beginning of the year. And it's a wonderful destination, by the way, if you're ever looking to go somewhere that is very healing. And there are so many different things around therapy, around just different ways to heal. It's a fantastic place to go. And it felt like when I went there, I stayed in this co-living where it felt like we were all kind of coming to a place where we were stopping and dealing with what we wanted to deal with. And it was honestly a really amazing, safe space to be around. So that's another thing. I feel like I've been asked so many times over the last however many years now, what are the best destinations for digital nomads? And for me, I will always come back to this, and it frustrates certain people, but I pick destinations based off of what I need at the time, which is a very privileged thing to say, but it's the truth. I pick destinations based off of what I am needing and what I'm craving at the time. I pick destinations based off of the languages that I speak and the cultures that I resonate with, and the countries on the list that were on the list before I took on this remote lifestyle. So there are certain places that I will go back to more, but I will never be like, you should go somewhere because there is a community here. Because what might work for one community and you in one community will not necessarily work for the next one. That is one thing that I feel also does not get talked about enough. And it's having an impact. The same 5 to 10 places are being literally like broken record posted online as the top 10 places you have to go as digital nomad. It's not only actually disempowering, quite frankly, dare I say, disempowering to people who want to take on the remote lifestyle, but it's also disempowering local communities. Like, I nearly went back to Bali at the end of last year because I was like, oh, I really want to be around some creative energy. And it's been like 5 or 6 years since I've been there. And then I saw this news piece where they were talking about the fact that they're putting in an elevator in Nusa Penida, which people have been unalived from getting swept up in the current at this beach. And you're putting in an elevator into this island right now because people don't want to do the trek down. That's just one extreme case of many of the impact that Western culture is having on these destinations that don't have the infrastructure to like maintain these crowds. And for anyone who's ever listened to a talk of mine about mindful content creation, you'll know that I say about the fact that we need to have more conversations around going to places and finding your own story. Find your own story. Stop going for the same 5 to 10 places. Like, don't get me wrong, these places are beautiful and the ones I've been to I've loved, but there is such a bigger world out there to explore. You really don't have to go that far even to live a remote life. In my talks that I've given, I would say, right, what's your story? What is it you are trying to tell the world? Who are you as a person? What is your authentic voice sharing? What is it you want to put out into the world? And I just feel like there needs to be more conversation from the remote lifestyle industries and spaces around what it means to pick a destination that actually is for you and not simply pushing the sexiest looking destination at the time that has been in, I don't know, Condé Nast or whatever, like for the last 10 years. Can we start being more about championing destinations that are not necessarily on these lists that come up every year? And don't get me wrong, I think like London, for example, is a fantastic place to remote work, but the UK has lots more places than just London to go and remote work. As the whole stereotype is, as long as you've got a Wi-Fi signal, like you can work from anywhere. So why are we still pushing the same handful of destinations? Let's be creative. Let's go think about our stories. What is it that we actually want from this remote lifestyle? And empower more people to do it that way. And that goes for destinations too. What more can we get from your destination and what can be shared in your campaigns? Because I feel like we're being a little bit sort of stuck in our ways around things. So what else can people see? Like, what more can we go see? Because I think digital nomads got a bit scapegoated right back in the summer with the revenge travel situation that happened where people were traveling. I didn't know this was a thing until last summer, but apparently there was a whole trend around people traveling at all costs post-pandemic. And don't get me wrong, as soon as I could, I was like, let me out. But it then obviously had a negative impact on communities. And maybe that's a responsibility we possibly have as long-term visitors, because short-term tourists feed off this too. And I feel like we've got a bigger conversation to have around like what it is that we're sharing these campaigns, where these crowds are being directed to. And for all of this, influencers and their photos. No, I am saying normies on their vacations trying to get all these photos. I was in Thailand, the Grand Palace, I think it's called, and I couldn't move the selfie arms. Like, it was crazy. I was literally walking around just trying to mind my own business, and I would get blocked. An arm would just stop me. And it was just regular tourists taking their family holiday photos. And don't get me wrong, I want you to have your memories. I want you to have the best time. But when it's now got to the point where we are stopping other people from going about their daily lives, there needs to be a bigger conversation around this travel and tourism mindset. So for me, I feel like I definitely, from the digital nomad perspective, because ultimately we are going places for longer, we are able to stay in local spaces and communities for longer time. Supermarket people start recognizing us. The baristas know our orders. The bakeries know what pastries we maybe want by this point. What else can we do to showcase how amazing a destination is, right? What more can we do? Because saying the same 5 places to go visit in a destination like Lisbon are the only things you can do in that city. And don't get me started on this whole hidden gems thing. But what more can we do to share why we live in Lisbon? Because don't get me wrong, I'm sure you live in Lisbon because you love Lisbon. I'm really honing in on Lisbon now. But I'm sure you absolutely do love this city. But why do you love it so much? What more is there? I went to a TEDx event when I was there in February, and it was in a little neighborhood called Marvilla. And the event itself was definitely not for me. The event wasn't for me because I'm not a creative living full-time in Lisbon. But it was such an amazing energy to go to the Convento, which is just this incredibly beautiful building, to see a massive community turnout of people who wanted to build up this up-and-coming neighborhood in Lisbon. The mayor turned up. There were several different people giving incredibly inspiring talks because it's TEDx. And then also there were local brands getting involved too. And so you then got to meet local brands and what they were up to. And then people, you could hear in like English and Portuguese, like these amazing conversations around like what people want to build, what they want to see more in their city. And I don't know why we're not talking more about that. I know that for myself, this is something that I really want to start going a bit more in on, because I just feel like it's not sexy necessarily to talk about the same 5 things that people are talking about that is trending on TikTok or whatever. However, I know for myself, I fell in love with travel as a child because I could string my first couple of words of Spanish together, and I felt like I really connected with Spain as a country. I lived in Spain for a couple of years as a child, and I really feel like part of that culture for me is like going home, because living there long term, it gets kind of integrated into your DNA, as it were, Like it starts becoming a part of who you are. Even when I study abroad, it was not always easy, but Brazilian culture still feels a part of who I am as a person, because it was my day to day every day. So to then hear that like people are building bubbles of expats and nomads in different places, and they're not really getting from the country what you maybe perhaps could in that respect, like whether it's learning a new language, it's building a new community that is local to the place, and really getting the culture, and like it just doesn't compute in my brain. And I feel like there's possibly something doesn't work in my mind. Let's just say that. It's like a 404 error. And also, as much as I'm really starting to enjoy the benefits of having AI for my business, let's not even get started on AI generated content that is just the same stuff that is being sort of not repurposed because there's no opinion behind it. But also there's a responsibility, I feel, if you're going to start a platform, if you're going to start a personal brand, and you're only going to regurgitate what has been said for the last 5 to 10 years about different destinations, starting a digital nomad life, whatever it is, please find a new thought. Like, come have a consultation with me. I do consultations on this exact thing. Please come and discover your story with me so that we can start really creating fresh content and actually start building something meaningful. I'm getting really passionate now and I keep losing my trail of thought. So let's just dive straight into the next thing, which is when it comes to destinations, what is next for me? I'm in Albania currently. I'm heading back to the UK for a couple of months, might be longer, I'm not sure. And it's funny, a part of my brain was like, am I failing by going back home? Like, what? Because if you've actually been following my content for the last 3 years, I've actually been back to the UK several times for work, for events, for my family. And that was a big part of why I picked the destinations I did up until this point. I knew for myself that I wanted to be home if I needed to be. And there's been a couple of times that I'm so grateful I listened to my gut and went home when I did. And now it's a different kind of listening to my gut. I'm listening to my gut and going home. But it's because there is some stuff that I really want to push forward next. I've had this really nice time to get to know some other destinations well, but I really want to focus on and hone in on the destinations that I feel like are something I have a bit more of an authority to speak on, and also that resonate more with me and are not just sort of following possible trends before. Because I'm slightly guilty of it too. I want, there's a community there. Maybe I can slot in here, or there's an event that might be nice here, so maybe I'll go. And I know that for myself, I want to be more purposeful and mindful in how I select my next moves. So it doesn't feel like I'm going backwards. It did for a bit, but it doesn't now. I've looked at my goals, what matters to me, what is it that I want and what I want to see more of in the space next. So stay tuned. But it doesn't feel like I'm going back, and I don't feel like I'm going back because of a return to office mandate or anything else that seems to be another thing that, that every 6 months the mainstream media likes to go, people must come back to the office. I'm not necessarily interested in going back to an office right now. If something comes up, I'm open to it. However, for me, this is about right now, the best place for me to be right now is to be back in the UK for several different things that I'm really looking forward to getting on top of. And I want to also just put it out there that if you have ever felt like, oh no, I can't possibly go home because that would be failing. I said I would do this and da. Give yourself permission. Trust me, the amount of times that I thought I was failing by coming back and it's actually turned out to be the best decision at the time, you just can't describe that feeling of relief. So I'm looking forward to the next step. If you're in London or if you're in the UK in general, let's meet up. Let's say hi. I've got the Remote Creatives next co-working session in London, which will be at the end of April on the 30th. Definitely go to the meetup and sign up, where I'll share more details. Yeah, here's to a new chapter of the Remote Life podcast. Thank you so much again for listening, and I can't wait to remote work with you again soon.